Act 1 of The Tempest does a lot of work. It does the usual stuff like introducing the protagonist, Prospero, who is a magician, but it also gives us a novel's worth of backstory while also introducing the central tensions of the play. Specifically, it investigates the nature of authority and the various forms rebellions against authority might take. And within that investigation of authority, it explores the relationship between servitude and love. Similar to much of Shakespeare's work, this act and this play as a whole will resist simplistic narratives or one-sentence claims about these topics. Instead, it's going to invite us into the complexity of these issues. It will provide us with a lot of questions, and it will frustratingly resist answers. So in this video, we're going to focus on the role that authority plays in Act 1 and how it sets us up for the rest of the play. And if this sounds like it's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing for more analysis of The Tempest and Shakespeare's other plays. And with that out of the way, let's go through Act 1 play by play. Act 1 begins at sea in the middle of a storm, and the first line is given to the boat's master. He gives an order to the boatswain, who then gives orders to the mariners. So within this stressful and dangerous opening moment, the chain of command activates and everybody has a role to play. Everybody has a real job to do. But then the nobility enter the scene. These are men who hired the mariners, who presumably pay the mariners. The mariners, it could be argued, perform their labor in service to these fancy people. And these fancy people enter the scene to give orders disguised as questions. The nobility do not actually have a role to play in helping this boat survive the storm, and yet they have demands. They seem to think that they have authority by virtue of their position, but everything that is happening on the stage makes it clear that in a moment of crisis, competency is the only authority. Alonso, for example, asks where the master is, and the implication is that the boatswain needs to either answer or go find the master for him. As a response, the boatswain gives an order back: keep below. And he goes further to say, you mar our labor. Keep your cabins. You do assist the storm. So right away, we get an inversion of the social hierarchy. Those in the laboring class give orders to the managing class. It's clear to anybody watching this that the master and boatswain have authority in the situation, and the nobles are just in the way. After Gonzalo tells the boatswain to remember how important everybody on board is, the boatswain hilariously responds, "None that I love more than myself," and then satirically encourages Gonzalo to use his authority as a counselor to calm the storm down. And by doing so, he's obviously highlighting how Gonzalo has no real authority or importance in the situation. Authority is contextual, something that the boatswain realizes and the nobles do not. It's like they think that authority is hereditary or something. Gonzalo takes comfort that he thinks the boatswain is more likely to die by hanging than by the storm. He's insisting on a domain of influence he can control rather than the storm, which he cannot. They continue to quarrel as the ship splits in two, and they pray for their lives as the scene ends. And with that first scene, the play establishes the nature and origins of authority and servitude right away. In the audience, we might be left believing that nature is the ultimate authority, one that cannot be controlled by the shipmaster's skill nor the good counsel of Gonzago. But then, in scene 2, we realize that somebody actually did control the storm. Prospero. Prospero controlled the storm. Miranda, his daughter, asks her father to calm the storm in the first lines of the scene. For a woman with almost no human contact, she seems to have a tremendous capacity for empathy. She seems to have suffered right along with the ship and wants the storm to stop. Prospero responds by telling Miranda that he has never done anything but in service to her. Or, as he says, I have done nothing but in care of thee, my dear one, thee, my daughter, who art ignorant of what thou art. And this sets up a fascinating connection between service, authority, and love that's going to continue throughout this act and this play. Prospero is a duke, more than a master of his poor cell, as he says, and yet he is servant to his daughter. He's the authority, but he's also a servant. So far the play has set up a pretty curious situation. We've got this a magic man who can create storms at sea, alone on an island with his 15-year-old daughter. And to understand how we got here, we're going to need some exposition. And this exposition creates what is the longest scene in the play. We learn that Prospero once had loads of authority as the Duke of Milan. We learn that Prospero delegated a lot of that authority to his brother, Antonio. We learn that Prospero neglected his responsibilities as the Duke and dedicated himself to the bettering of his mind. We learn that Antonio conspired with the King of Naples to usurp Prospero, which ultimately led to Prospero and his daughter being sent out to sea, which resulted in them living for 12 years on this island. In that time, Prospero has been master of the island. He's also been Miranda's tutor, as well as her father, and an argument could be made that he's also played the role of Miranda's mother. If you've seen Julia Taymor's film adaptation, you know what I mean. And these positions, tutor and parent, call the attention to the complexity of authority and control. Those are positions of power, but they're simultaneously positions of service. We're going to return to that idea in a bit. For now, the story that Prospero tells justifies the storm because the storm will bring his brother, the usurper Antonio, to the island. Miranda is satisfied with this whole story, and so satisfied that she falls asleep. Enter Ariel. Ariel is a shape-shifting spirit of the island, and notably a servant to Prospero. Ariel enters the scene and greets Prospero as his, quote, great master, before telling him that his orders have been fulfilled perfectly. Nobody has been injured in the storm, the ship is safe in harbor, all the important players have been scattered about the island. We then learn about the relationship between Ariel and Prospero. Ariel works for Prospero in exchange for freedom. Let me remember thee that thou hast promised, which is not yet performed me, Ariel says, and quickly clarifies what he means. My liberty. We learn that Ariel works for Prospero because Prospero freed Ariel from imprisonment when he came to the island. A witch named Sycorax had confined Ariel in a, quote, cloven pine because Ariel refused to follow her orders. Prospero freed the spirit from this confinement in exchange for a year of service. And there are a few really interesting bits about this exposition. The first is that Prospero clearly wants to characterize Sycorax as an evil witch. I mean, he says directly that she's evil. But the curious thing here is that when he describes Sycorax, he's also describing himself. Sycorax uses magic. So does Prospero. She was an exile from Algiers. Prospero is an exile from Milan. Sycorax came to the island with a child. Prospero came to the island with a child. When Ariel didn't perform a task, Sycorax imprisoned him in a tree where he stayed for 12 years. When Ariel hints that he might not perform a task that Prospero requires of him, Prospero threatens to confine Ariel to an oak for 12 years. Sycorax and Prospero, they kind of seem the same to me. So I guess we in the audience just have to accept that Sycorax uses bad magic, but Prospero uses good magic, and that's why Ariel should be happy to serve Prospero. Or perhaps we are led to believe that Sycorax and Prospero are both terrible bosses, but Ariel learned his lesson the first time and won't disobey a magician again. Ariel will simply have to accept his role as a laborer and follow the instructions of his manager because he doesn't want to go to tree jail again. In short, Prospero has authority over Ariel because he liberated Ariel from prison, and this has adequately made Ariel fearful of a return to prison. So, authority is based on a combination of gratitude and fear. Another interesting bit about this exposition comes when Prospero describes the child of Sycorax. He says that she had a son that she did litter here, a freckled whelp, hag-born, not honored with a human shape. This description is a clear attempt to dehumanize both Sycorax and the child that she left on the island. And in response to this terrible insult, Ariel very calmly corrects Prospero. Yes, Ariel says, Caliban, her son, which affirms Caliban's humanity and disrupts Prospero's ability to fully control the narrative of his predecessors. Throughout this scene, Prospero tries to control the narrative of his past and the history of the island, but Ariel shows us the limitations of that control. With that, Ariel continues his obedience to Prospero and becomes a sea nymph only visible to Prospero. Interestingly, Ariel always seems to take the form of traditionally feminine forms when taking a subordinate role in the play. A nymph here, a harpy later. That would make for a really interesting essay topic on gender performance in the play. Ariel is coded as male when pushing back against authority, but female when subordinate. Something to think about. Anyway, at this point, we get introduced to one of the play's most charismatic characters, Caliban. Right away, we learn that Miranda disapproves of him, and she says that she does not love to look upon him, but Prospero reminds her that they need him. He does make our fire, fetch our wood, and serves in offices that profit us. And this reminder complicates the slave-master relationship in the same way that the first scene did. The boat crew were indispensable to the managerial class during the storm, just as Caliban and Ariel are indispensable to Prospero on the island. And yet, because Prospero can threaten violence and torture, they serve him. Prospero needs them. They don't need Prospero. Yet, Prospero has authority. As Caliban enters, we learn the history of his relationship with Prospero. They both seem to agree on the fundamentals of the story. When Prospero arrived on the island, he and Caliban had a good, collaborative relationship. Prospero gave Caliban water with berries and taught him about the universe. In exchange, Caliban showed Prospero the qualities of the island, where to get water and where to grow food. But now, they both agree, their relationship is different. Prospero restricts Caliban to living in a rock and in a constant state of servitude. To put it bluntly, Prospero enslaves Caliban. Prospero justifies this relationship of enslaving Caliban by claiming that Caliban tried to violate the honor of his child. And Miranda piles on by saying that he is deservedly confined into this rock, who has deserved more than a prison. And I do need to make a quick note here that some editors question whether or not this speech is intended for Miranda or not. It's out of character for her, and Caliban does not respond to her, but to Prospero. I'll link to a video in the description and here to discuss this issue of editing a little further. For his part, Caliban doesn't deny any of these accusations. He said that he wanted to populate the island with a bunch of Calibans, so we have a complicated little intersection of power here. Prospero justifies slavery by attributing an unrestrained sexual desire to the enslaved. Under Prospero's narrative, Prospero needs to enslave Caliban or risk mixing his noble blood with the laboring class through his daughter. Under Caliban's narrative, the island needs workers, and he wants to populate the island with those workers. Some critics have argued that Prospero actually uses Miranda's chastity and the cultural value that's placed on female chastity as a trap, which he then uses to justify the usurpation and enslavement of Caliban, as a colonialist justification for the taking of the island from Caliban. Which is an interesting point. Prospero fashions himself somebody who was unjustly removed from a position of power, but in his first scene, we learn that he has unjustly removed Caliban from a position of power. Prospero needs to legitimize his behavior so that he is not a hypocrite. And here we get some insight into the complexities of the play. Prospero is both a usurper and the usurped. At the same time, Caliban is positioned as somebody who makes unwanted sexual advances, and he's a victim of colonialist policies. All these things seem to be true at the same time. And at this point in the play, we are then introduced to Ferdinand, who enters the scene led by Ariel. Ferdinand, who thinks that his father is dead, sees Miranda and instantly falls in love. Prospero then turns to the audience and says, "The Duke of Milan and his more braver daughter could control thee, if now 'twere fit to do it." And with that statement, he calls our attention to the role that love plays in power dynamics. They can control Ferdinand because Ferdinand loves Prospero's daughter. Prospero controls Caliban and Ariel through fear, but he can possibly control Ferdinand through love. Prospero then decides to put some obstacles in the way of the lovers so that they have to overcome something in order to be together. He wants to create a situation where they have to choose to be together. So, similar to Juliet's father, and Helen's father, and all those other Shakespearean fathers, he decides to say that his daughter cannot be with the guy that she wants to be with. But Prospero does it on purpose, knowing that Miranda is going to disobey his orders. She's going to dismiss his authority, but by doing so, she's going to do exactly what he wants. So, who is in control here? What is the nature of authority? It is complicated. When Miranda protests that Prospero should not judge Ferdinand right away, Prospero responds angrily by saying, "What, I say, my foot, my tutor?" He's at once calling attention to the power relationship between him and his daughter, and the power relationship between a teacher and a student. As the foot, she cannot advise the head what to do. As the daughter and student, she cannot tell the father and teacher what to believe. He claimed earlier in this scene that his tutelage of Miranda was an act of service to Miranda. And now, when Miranda tries to advise him, he tells her that he's the one in control. He understands what she needs better than she does, and his authority over her is an act of service to her. But again, He knows she's going to violate the terms of that relationship. He wants her to disobey him and undermine his authority. So we are left, at the end of Act 1, with a series of relationships that exist within a power hierarchy. Some are subordinated through fear, some through gratitude, some through love, some through a mix of these. It seems that every relationship serves to justify some position of power, but also they seem to challenge positions of power. Prospero's position as Miranda's tutor, for example, implies that she must learn enough to make her own decisions and challenge the authority of her teacher. Prospero's role as a teacher is a form of self-subverting authority. If a teacher is successful, they will undermine the basis for their own authority. There will be nothing else left to teach. Another example of a relationship that at once instantiates a position of power while also subverting it is Prospero's relationship to Caliban. The relationship itself confirms that Prospero has power. Caliban performs the labor, but at the same time, this dependence on Caliban for wood and food undermines the authority that he has over Caliban. Additionally, Caliban was the king of the island before being usurped by Prospero. Prospero was the Duke of Milan before being usurped by Antonio. Now, Prospero plans to take back his position. This very ambition, held by Prospero, undermines his own position of authority on the island. If Prospero can retake Milan, cannot Caliban retake the island? The presence of Caliban demonstrates how Prospero's justification for power simultaneously undermines his justification for power. And so, we'll leave Act 1 with a bunch of complicated feelings about power relationships, and those feelings are only going to become more nuanced as we continue to read or watch. This is going to take us on to Act 2, where we will focus on the role of ambition in this play. So I guess you could subscribe if you want to be notified when that one comes out in a couple days. Thank you for watching.